Hello and welcome back to season 3 of Prescription for Change. I am your host, Dr. Michelle, physician, entrepreneur, and your prescription for intentional living. So I'm really excited about the start of this season because, as I've said before, health is just an amalgam of our life experiences. So it doesn't just encompass what we typically think about in the exam room with your doctor or your physical health, but it's mental health, it's emotional, it's spiritual, it is financial situation, and making sure that we're able to take intentional steps every single day to pivot and make some changes. So today I'm really excited because we're going to be diving a lot deeper than just my personal journey and experience and speaking to you on that, but also bringing in experts and being able to really hit on topics that are going to be relevant to me and the guests that I'm bringing on, but also to all of you so that you can start to make some changes in your health and be able to pivot without feeling like you're starting over again. So today I'm talking about something that isn't discussed enough in high achieving circles. What happens when you reach perimenopause, when you feel like your energy is dipping, when you feel like you're not able to get enough sleep, you're not able to focus as you were before or have that clarity, your confidence starts to shift a little bit. So for many driven women, perimenopause shows up quietly. It's disguised as burnout or stress, or maybe just this feeling of needing to try harder. But it's not about a performance problem, and it's more about just being able to make those intentional changes and knowing exactly what to do. I know for myself personally, and for a lot of high achieving women, it's this thought of not knowing exactly what to do in this next phase of life. So in this power shift, in this episode, I'm so happy to be joined by Charlotte Beales-Hart. She's a former corporate lawyer turned nutritional therapist in training and a health coach. Charlotte works with high performing women, helping them to navigate midlife transitions and reclaim clarity, sustainable energy, and confidence using evidence-based informed nutrition and real life strategy. So today we're going to be unpacking a lot of how to be able to distinguish burnout from hormonal shifts, the biggest mistakes ambitious women make when trying to fix fatigue, and then what sustainable performance really looks like in midlife. So we are going to dive right in. Charlotte, thank you so much for joining us today. Can you just start by giving us a little bit of an introduction as to how you got started and how you made that shift from being a corporate lawyer to a health coach?
Hi, Dr. Michelle. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm very excited for this conversation. Yeah, so I am a mum of one and I was a lawyer for 18 years. I had some health issues throughout that time and I had my own fair share of burnout. I went through 6 rounds of IVF to have my son, and then he was born with a congenital heart defect. So I had a lot of stress going on in my life, but I was also really ambitious. I was a lawyer. I wanted to succeed in my career, and I did for many years, but I didn't really understand the impacts that perimenopause were going to have on me when I hit my 40s, as well as the stress and the burnout. And I eventually decided to move on from my legal career, and I had learned so much about my own health and nutrition and lifestyle tools that I went on to qualify as a health coach. So I did that, and then I became really interested in the science of nutrition. So I've been back to school. I'm now in my 4th year. I'm just completing my training as a nutritional therapist. So I have a huge interest in the impact of food and how nutrition can work as medicine. It is really, really important for our health and well-being.
That is amazing. And thank you for sharing so much of your personal story and your journey, because I think those are the things that really hit home for a lot of people, is knowing that, having a sense of being able to have things resonate and knowing that you're not alone. And there's so many women who have different situations, but we're all kind of making that shift. And that's really kind of the ultimate shift, is moving from law and really just changing your whole career in the midst of raising a child child and starting your family, I think is a huge thing. And I think so many women just need to hear that it is possible to do. You're not kind of stuck in this one lane.
No, absolutely. Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think, we wear so many hats as women and we get to our 40s and we're dealing and juggling with so many things. And we want to feel well and we want to feel energized. And that's absolutely possible. Can go through into our 50s and 60s and beyond shining brightly. But we just need to learn about our bodies and our health and learn how to support ourselves so that we can perform to our best, both at work and at home.
Absolutely. So, with that said, how do you coach high performing women to be able to know how to stop pushing through and understanding, is this normal stress? Is this a huge hormonal shift with perimenopause that's affecting energy and focus and sleep?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think there are lots of crossovers there. It is hard to identify sometimes. But, the high performing women I talk to, they're all very resilient, they're very capable, they're articulate, they've probably been holding up careers for years, if not decades, having families, running households, dealing with work pressure, dealing with the pressures of rising in their chosen profession, whether that's as a doctor or a teacher or an entrepreneur. And as I said, they all wear a lot of hats and they have all of this pressure. But sometimes I think women mistake that purely for stress and they use tools which they've been using since their 30s to push through. They push harder, they just put it down to stress. But actually, it's possible to recognize when you might be starting to have hormonal shifts in perimenopause. Because what starts happening is your estrogen starts fluctuating wildly and your progesterone starts dropping a little bit. And this has a lot of physiological impacts on us. So what that looks like, a disruption to sleep. And, we've all had disrupted sleep at one time or another, but there's a very particular kind of disrupted sleep in perimenopause where you can fall asleep because you're totally exhausted at night and you wake up at 3 a.m. with your heart racing and your mind working overtime. You start ruminating on all of your worries and it's hard to get back to sleep. And that can be an impact of hormonal change as well as stress. So that's one thing. The other thing is that's really common in high achieving women is this sort of cognitive change that they notice. So it's losing words, as you're speaking, very familiar words that you think you should know. And it's quite unsettling when that happens. Or you lose your train of thought during, a meeting. So there's those cognitive changes. There's also, I find a lot of women actually have anxiety. It's like this new onset of anxiety that they can't quite put their finger on. So that's also quite common. There's also changes in body composition. We would talk about weight loss, but they might start noticing that it's harder to lose weight. They have kind of midsection fat storage, that sort of thing as well. So that could also be a sign because, perimenopause does affect your metabolism. It makes you a little bit more insulin resistant and it does have impacts on your hormonal cascades, essentially. Those are all things that can impact you. And you also, there's this sort of idea of changes in energy. You have sort of energy volatility is what I call it. You have that afternoon crash at 3 p.m. where you're so tired and, someone will talk about wanting to lie on the floor of their office because they're so, they're suddenly exhausted at 3 p.m. But then they use caffeine and sugar to pick themselves up again. That can be a sign as well. But as I say, there is a lot of crossover with stress as well. But I think a lot of women, as they go into their 40s, they start to notice these little changes. And that's when we have to start taking notice of these changes and sort of support our physiology for midlife rather than rely on the habits that we formed during our 30s that were fine at the time, but they're no longer working.
So you were saying just being able to support these changes in midlife?
Yeah, so it's just supporting changes in midlife because we have, it does affect our physiology and we can't rely on the habits that we've always relied on in our 30s and 20s to push us through. So there are some changes that we might have to think about making in midlife.
Thank you so much for that, because I have to say, and I was even chuckling a little bit as you were going through some of the changes that are noted, because I'm like, okay, check, check, check.
Yeah.
And it is quite unsettling. That's the perfect word for it, because if you're not aware of these changes, and it's not like, people are talking about this a lot. No one warns you about the women before us, it's not like they're warning you about what's going to happen. And
Mm,
so it is this almost like out of body experience. Like you're,
mm,
losing words or trying to find the right word to say, or losing your train of thought, like you said. And that all has to do with the change in focus and maybe a little bit of dip in energy. I always joke in my office, I always know when it's around 3:30 because I can feel that energy crash.
mm.
And so being able to make shifts are really important. So the next question is really something that I feel like I've been able to make some changes, some reasonable changes, but I really would love to hear from you. How do you coach women, especially ambitious women who are still really trying to thrive in their career or pursue entrepreneurship and are always busy? How do you coach them surrounding meals and being able to kind of fix the weight gain or fix the energy? Like, what are some
Mm.
meals or nutrition tips that you can give surrounding that?
There is a lot that you can do, but there are some sort of foundational things that I think are really important in midlife. And they don't only relate to nutrition, but the first one would be making sure that you eat breakfast. And I know this is a really difficult one for a lot of women because I think a lot of us have grown up in 90s and 2000s diet culture where it was all about restriction and trying to fast and living on coffee and rushing in the morning and not really having a good breakfast, but having a good first meal of the day, which has enough protein and good fats. Because I think a lot of women are still scared of fat, and having good
Mhm.
fats in that first meal is really important. And fiber as well. Fiber is this unsung hero. It has so many health benefits. And so I think teaching women the importance of having a good breakfast with 30
Mhm.
grams of protein is the guideline, and having some good fats like avocado or Greek yogurt. And you can also look at things like flaxseed and chia seed if you want a sort of a yogurt bowl type of breakfast, or there's eggs. But it's making sure that you have a good amount of protein, some fiber, and fat as well. And what that does is it prevents crashes later in the day. It
Mhm.
evens out your blood sugar, because a lot of women in midlife don't understand that they need to make sure that their blood sugar is not fluctuating too wildly. We talk about
Right.
this kind of roller coaster of blood sugar and insulin,
Mhm.
where it causes us, if we don't have a good foundation in the morning, we can get energy crashes, we can get cravings, it puts stress on our bodies. And so the aim is to have a really good breakfast within a sort of 60 to 90 minutes of waking. And for women that still find that quite difficult, because I know a lot of women, they like to have their coffee and get on with their day and maybe eat a
Right.
bit later. So I still try and see if they're open to having a small breakfast, but which has a good amount of protein. So maybe half a cup of Greek yogurt, some berries, to give them those polyphenols and those antioxidants, a
Mhm.
bit of fiber like chia seeds or any kind of seed, sunflower, flax, to give them some fiber to support their guts,
Right.
which has all kinds of impacts on health. But it's really, as I say, it's to support their blood sugar regulation so that they can have a steady flow of energy during the day.
Mm.
So that would be the main foundation I would look at. And the other thing is thinking about caffeine. I love my coffee in the morning, don't get me
Right.
wrong. And I never ask my clients to give up coffee. It's about being strategic about it. So it's making sure that you don't drink coffee afternoon if you possibly can, or any caffeine
Mm.
afternoon, because there's caffeine hidden in a lot of other things, like even like dark chocolate,
Right.
Coca-Cola, energy drinks. I wouldn't suggest those anyway, but I think think we over caffeinate to try and get through the energy deficit that we're actually
Right.
experiencing. We just have to think a bit more about when we're having our coffee. I do find that having coffee on an empty stomach for some women can cause energy problems later in the day. I know a lot of women like to fast in the morning, and for
Mhm.
some women, it works fine. But if you're noticing that you're having energy crashes, you might want to look at making sure that before you have your coffee or with your coffee, you have breakfast with some protein, fats, fiber to kind of keep your energy steady. It's all about testing things and seeing what works for you.
Right.
But that's certainly my experience with a lot of the women that I speak to.
Okay. Thank you. So I know the old adage, there was so much that you packed in there, such great information. The old adage of breakfast is the most important meal of the day. I know
Mm,
my kiddos are tired of hearing me say that. And I've said that to some of my clients as well, is that it really is important. And so if you're not a person who is fasting for any particular reason, it's
yeah.
great to be able to kind of get that boost of energy, natural energy, and kind
Mm,
of get your brain going. I find that need to eat like meals every 3 to 4 hours, but it's
mhm,
also about that balance so that you're not having that sugar crash or that
mhm.
roller coaster, like you were alluding to previously. And also that you're not getting hangry an hour after you've had your coffee or a little light pastry or something of that sort, because it really is just that's quick energy and
Yeah,
it doesn't last long. So an hour
yeah.
later, you're going to be searching for a snack and really not feeling so great. So, yeah, that balance is so important. And the nutrition piece is just really important in being able to maintain the weight that you want, build some muscle, and also
Mm,
lose weight. If your body goes into
yeah.
starvation mode or feels like it's starving, then it certainly is going to hold on to all of that fat, not knowing when
That's
your next
right.
meal is. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we just can't burn fat if we're on this constant sugar roller coaster. We're not in that sort of nice midsection where we just, because I mean, blood sugar ups and downs are completely normal. We need them, but we just don't want the huge dips and highs, because to be able to burn fat, we need to have steady blood sugar. It impacts our cortisol, our stress hormones, all of those things that just make us feel not good during the day, make us feel
Right.
depleted, and it can affect our cognition as well, being able to have brain energy to get through the day.
Mhm. All right. So you kind of alluded to a lot of the things that I'm going to ask in this next question, but just want to
Mm,
hear what are for a busy executive or entrepreneur,
mm.
what are kind of your three non negotiables as far as things that you need to do in perimenopause in order to make a good shift in your health habits?
There are so many I could choose, but I love this question. And the first one might surprise you, but it's getting morning light in your
Mhm.
eyes. And this is all about regulating your circadian rhythm, which has such a huge impact on your appetite hormones, your sleep as well. So I try and ask women I work with in perimenopause, in midlife, to see if they can get morning light in their eyes first
Mhm.
thing. So getting outside, if possible, for 10 to 15 minutes. What that does is you get morning light in your eyes and it hits this amazing little bundle of neurons called your suprachiasmatic nucleus in your
Mhm.
hypothalamus in your brain. And it just resets all of your clocks because you have lots of biological, like cellular clocks, and it sets off the correct hormone cascade for kind of sleeping and waking.
Mhm.
So I always say that a good night's sleep begins in the morning, and getting light in your eyes is a big part of that because it tells your
Okay.
body to release cortisol so that you're awake. And then it also later on in the evening, so all of that impacts your melatonin production in the evening so that you can then sleep. So getting
Mm.
outside, even if it's cloudy, it doesn't have to be bright sunlight. It can be wintry light, but that's usually enough light to start off that hormone cascade. And for women that live in sunny places, don't wear sunglasses, go outside, walk the dog if you can. You get extra points if you have a little walk because that's
Right.
because that's great. That's great. That's great for stress as well, and
Mm.
just gives you a little time in the morning. I know that's not always possible because you're getting kids ready for school and all of that. But even if you can go out on a patio and get some light, it's really, really helpful. So that would be my first foundation that I recommend. The second one is definitely going back to having a balanced breakfast, a balanced meal in the morning to balance your blood sugar, to support your hormones, to support your cognition. So that's that one. And the third one is really looking at sleep for performance. Sleep is such a foundational thing. And I know we hear it all the time, but it really is so important for us. There are a few tips that I usually give, and there are lots of things you can do, but some really effective ones are simply turning down your lights after your dinner. Instead of having a lot of overhead lighting, bright lighting in your house, just turn those off and turn on a few lamps if you have them, so that the light is lower a good few hours before you go to bed. And that just starts to signal to your brain and your body that it's almost time to go to sleep. And you start to get your melatonin going so that you can sleep later. So that will be one thing. The other thing I recommend is making sure that your room that you sleep in is really dark. You know, I always joke that I sleep in a cave. I go around, I'm the one that goes around and covers all of it, because you know, you have those little lights on kind of speakers and
Right.
things in your room, and I kind of cover them over because any kind of light can stimulate you again into wakefulness. So sleeping in a really dark room and making sure that the room is cool as well is also really helpful. You can also take a hot shower or a bath, and that's sort of counterintuitive because you think that will make me hot, that'll make me hotter. But
Right.
actually, because your body kind of acts like a radiator, the heat radiates off you and actually it cools your body temperature down. And, you know, I think that's really important for sleep as well.
That's also relaxing too. It sounds like
Yeah,
having a nice hot shower before bed
yeah,
can be
yeah.
relaxing for sure.
Yeah, and trying to have a little routine so that you're telling yourself it's nearly time for bed. I mean, I think having a digital curfew is really helpful
Mm,
if
mhm.
possible. 2 hours, even, I mean, an hour at least before you go to sleep. Put your phone in another room or put it in a drawer, or
Right.
try to stop sending emails because it's overstimulating. So that would be the other thing that I would recommend.
And those are all really great things. I know I can add in a couple of those for sure,
Mm,
but even just thinking about how you like the first thing that you started with is saying getting some morning light and then coming full circle at the end of the day and, dimming the lights as you're getting ready for sleep and then having it completely dark. And
mm,
that's kind of regulating, being able to get into that routine to regulate, like you said, your circadian
mm,
rhythm and get your melatonin going. And I think the other important thing, which we're kind of in the same different phases but similar experiences, is for adolescents as well, is being able to, as they have these changes in their sleep going from early to mid childhood and going into adolescence, is the screens are inevitable. They're in schools, they're at our work, they're in
mm,
every facet of our life. And so it's hard to really just be able to disconnect and say, okay, I'm going to have boundaries surrounding when I have screen time and when I shut it off. So the
mm,
digital boundaries, especially before bedtime, is
mm,
extremely important to be able to get some good sleep. So I'm glad that
mm.
you mentioned that as well.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, it can be a family thing. If you could talk about it with your children as
Mhm.
well and the importance of it, I think it can be really, really helpful.
So, as we're in this recognizing the different things that are happening with our body physiologically and being able to make some fixes and starting to get into some good routines, what are some things that you notice? Like, how does perimenopause impact confidence and identity? And how can we move from a place of wisdom instead of willpower?
I love this question. And I don't think we talk about it enough, this question of kind of losing our identity. Because I
Mhm.
think a lot of high achieving women I talk to, you know, they've always been articulate, they've always been resilient and confident and capable. And then they start to notice some changes, those ones that I was talking about in terms of feeling a bit sort of having this brain fog, losing words, losing train of thought. And so their whole identity that sort of built the career that they are now in is a bit shaken and it's very
Mhm.
unsettling, especially if you also layer on anxiety. A lot of women I find get suddenly very anxious at 6 p.m. or in the evening. And I think it can be really destabilizing if you've always relied on your intellectual capabilities to get where
Mhm.
you are. And you've got there because you've used certain habits throughout your 30s where you've pushed through stress, you've worked long hours, you've sacrificed sleep, and it's been okay. And you've got to the place you have because of all of those efforts that you have made. But then you do start questioning your identity a little bit, I think, when you start
Right.
noticing these changes. And I think that can be really hard. I certainly found it really hard. And I think what we have to do is move away from those old habits and start recognizing or see it as an invitation to introduce more nurturing habits, looking after ourselves, looking after our health and our nervous system and our nutrition, making sure that we're really well nourished so that we can continue to perform well. It is really difficult. The wisdom comes where you're learning about your body, about the changes, recognizing those shifts, and just being a little bit kinder to yourself and choosing some habits that actually support you rather than mean that you're constantly pushing through the stress.
I love that, just being able to give ourselves a little bit of grace as
Yeah.
we're noticing these shifts and noticing these changes, and as we're trying to figure it all out. Because again,
Mm.
this is all great advice, and each person has to kind of figure out that little piece of the puzzle that's unique to them, right? Yeah. So I think this is all great information, and knowing that you don't have to push through as you always have, because that's not sustainable, and that's
Mm.
not the way to be able to pivot in this new stage of life and health, and figuring that out and being able to be at peace with that as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. So I have one final question for you.
Mm.
What does sustainable performance really look like in midlife? And how is it different from the hustle driven success that many women built their careers on?
Yeah, I mean, this is really important. A lot of women have built their careers, as I said, on the hustle and being able to push through. And it almost becomes a badge of honor that they can get through on very little sleep and deal with work pressures. Unfortunately, those habits work in our 30s, but we get to our 40s and then we need to be a little bit more nurturing of ourselves, as we already said. Performance is about nourishing ourselves adequately during the day, protecting our sleep and supporting our nervous system. I mean, we haven't talked much about that, but that's a really key part, I think, making sure that we're managing our stress and recognizing that it's not decline or you're not failing. It's just you have to make some shifts. And performance looks like being able to focus on yourself a little bit more and moving away from habits that don't serve you anymore.
Oh my goodness, I'm so glad that you said that, is really focusing on ourselves, because we're so
Mm,
busy. I feel like women in general are just so busy taking care of other
mhm.
people, checking in on
Yeah.
others, making sure everyone is okay, and really looking at, our cup is empty and we're still giving and giving and giving and pouring into others. And it really is
Mm,
just, you kind of hit a wall after a while, realizing that this is not sustainable, that you have to pour into
mm.
yourself and give to yourself before you can start giving to others, right? Like putting on your oxygen mask first. If the plane is
Yeah.
going down, you got to take care of yourself first before you can go and help other people. I think it's a
Yeah.
really hard concept. It was for me, and I can imagine many other women can identify with that. It's a really hard concept to be able to do that for yourself, do something for yourself, and not feel selfish.
Yeah, and I think you do have to start looking out for yourself before you start getting impacts on your health. I think that's really, really key. And there's no reason we can't all thrive in our careers, but the idea is to burn bright, not burn out,
Right.
and go through this transition as a power pivot by supporting ourselves. And it's definitely not the end and it's not decline. It's just making some small changes consistently, which really support ourselves and not to feel guilty about it.
So I know I said I had one last question, but this is actually the last question.
Okay. Okay.
So I'm really curious to hear, and you've given already so many great nuggets for us to be able to incorporate. But if you could write a prescription for every ambitious woman entering midlife, one mindset shift and one daily habit, what would it be?
Well, the mindset shift would be not feeling guilty about looking after yourself. As we've said, you need to be able to fill your own cup before you can give to others. It's absolutely the time to stop feeling like that's a selfish thing. It's time to really support ourselves so that we can look after everyone around us. And then the habit, I would say, it would be fueling ourselves adequately during the day, like really making sure that we're getting enough of our macronutrients and a wide variety of vegetables and fruits, and not living on caffeine and sugar, and really supporting our blood sugar balance.
That is awesome. Thank you so much. And I think those two tie together beautifully, because having that mindset of I'm going to pour into myself, and what better way to start giving to yourself than starting off with a nutrient dense meal that's going to, I always say it has to
Mm,
be simple and delicious and nutrient dense.
yeah,
So if you could get those three
yeah,
things in, still
absolutely.
be able to enjoy my food for sure.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I
Yes.
mean, it has to be delicious. Otherwise, you won't stick to it. So
Right.
you need to find those things that are keeping you satiated and keeping you healthy, but you also really love. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. This was such a powerful conversation. I learned so much just hearing your story and speaking to you, and I'm glad that you can impart that on the audience today. If today's episode resonated with you, let this be your reminder that midlife is not a decline, it is actually a recalibration. So, performance in your 20s and 30s may have been fueled by drive, determination, and just pushing forward, but sustainable performance in midlife is going to be fueled by strategy. And that's exactly what Charlotte has provided for us today. So we're so grateful for your wisdom and just helping us being able to start to recognize what those changes are and how we can start to make those small intentional steps every single day to change those habits and be able to shift in midlife. So I want everyone to stop pushing against the shift, start leading through it. And if this episode spoke to you, I would love for you all to share it with another high performing woman who needs to hear it, screenshot it, tag me, and tell me your biggest takeaway. This is Prescription for Change, where we don't just adapt to change, we lead it. So until next time, cheers to your health.